მოვიდა ჩვენი სპეციალური სტუმარიც. Hello James, can you hear me? James, you are muted, so we don't hear you. Okay.
I was double muted.
Okay.
Now I am not muted. Hello, yes, I can hear you.
Great, great. First of all, thank you for joining our event. It's a pleasure to have you as a special guest, and we all are looking forward to listening to your speak about 34 years in testing. And I would like to highlight that I'm super excited to have this amazing opportunity to see, speak, and hear you. And we are sure this meeting will be the best chance for us to get a new experience and knowledge in this field from the legend of testing industry. So please start your presentation if you are ready.
Okay. Well, I hope it just occurred to me listening to you that I hope English will be acceptable for this because I don't speak any other languages. So here we go. I'm going to share. So can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. You are presenting.
Thank you.
You are presenting your screen. Okay, great. Okay, so we'll do that. All right, 34 years in testing. So I made a little timeline that I want to talk to you about that will put in context some of the history of testing. Because what I'd like you to do is see yourselves, assuming you're interested in testing, and the broader history of testing and technology development in general, and the computer industry in general, over actually the past 60 years. But 34 of those years, I've been involved with it. So what you see here is this little timeline that I can shrink and grow and move around. So I'm gonna, this is the part of it that I was involved with. In 1987, I joined Apple Computer and as a tester. And I was the youngest manager in the R&D group at Apple Computer, which is the only thing I'm really proud of, I think, in my career, is that I was the youngest. I'm not the best programmer, not the smartest guy, but I was the youngest manager in the R&D division at Apple Computer in 1987. And I was 20 years old when they hired me as a manager. And there were interns who were older than me at that time. So that's my testing career, goes from then to now. And the thing is that the things that I got involved in really started all the way back in 1961. Because in 1961, the man who would become my mentor and teacher, Jerry Weinberg, at the age of 28, wrote a chapter about software testing in a book about computer programming. And it was, I believe, the very first chapter about testing in any book that anyone had ever written in the history of the industry. So that was all the way back here. And he wrote at the age of 28 with no teacher to guide him that testing isn't about test cases. It's not about how many test cases you have. It's about your suspicious nature and lively imagination. And that kind of writing, there's nothing like it anywhere around that time frame. And in fact, later on, let me do that. I was trying to move this. There we go. Later on, there was the famous 1968 NATO conference on software engineering. They hardly say anything about testing. There's a section on testing, and you know what they say? They say, you should definitely do testing. you should have a wonderful specification and you should test against it. But they don't say how to do testing. They don't say anything about the nature of testing. It's for them, they wrote about testing as if it were just a task, nothing special about it. The first textbook on software testing was in 1972 called Program Test Methods. It's the first full book about testing that was ever published. And they talk about specifications and test cases. They don't talk about suspicious attitudes and lively imagination, although there's one little statement in that book by one person who wrote one little article in that book. And that person says that the best writing on testing that he'd ever seen was Jerry Weinberg from this book in 1961. That's how I found out about it, actually. So in 1974, Jerry writes a book called Introduction to General Systems Thinking, which does not mention software testing anywhere in the book, but it's really a book about software testing. It's a book about how to think critically about technology, how to model technology. He really doesn't mention technology. He doesn't mention computer science at all. It's all about general systems. It could be applied to anything. But when I read it, I was reading it in the context of software testing, and it blew my mind. It taught me how to think in subtle, deep ways about risk in technology, how not to be fooled by technology, how to see inside it, how to see the invisible. It really blew my mind. He wrote that in 1974. I didn't see it till a lot later, because the first thing I ever did with computers was in 1976 when I was 10 years old. And somebody gave me my first electric calculator, and I did a science fair project about computers, and it was terrible. I knew nothing about computers. I basically read a couple of little kids' books about computers and then made some posters. But I was really interested in computers. I just didn't have one yet until around 1980 when I got my first computer, and it led to me being just completely obsessed. And so obsessed, I left home at 14, lived by myself in a hotel room, and started writing video games. And that's what I did for a living until until Apple hired me in 1987. So that's why Apple hired me, is I had done a bunch of video games and I knew a lot about Apple IIs. So I was hired just based on my technical knowledge. So I wasn't professional. I had never worked in an office building before. I didn't know what a conference room was and how do you use a conference room. I had only worked in my boss's living room, basically, and then later his garage. I got upgraded to work in his garage. But what's fascinating about this is, in the whole course of the history of this industry, I got involved in computers as a young adult right when the microcomputer revolution was happening. So we were going away from mainframes. I've never used a mainframe. I was the first generation of people who were using things like IBM PCs, the computers that we all use today. So I was kind of lucky to be involved right at that time, right when spreadsheets were invented. Now, right around 86, a guy named Kem Kainer writes a book called Testing Computer Software, which was the first good book that was directly about testing software. And I found out about it a few years later when I was working at Borland. And Kem would become a very important person in my career because I met him in 94, and he and I became kind of study partners. We would hang out a lot. We collaborated a lot. We collaborated for about 15 years. He had 2 PhDs. I had 0 PhDs and was a high school dropout. So if you do the math, we averaged 1 PhD each between him and me. So that's just mathematics. You can't argue with that. So he was super academic, and I was super anti-authoritarian, crazy creative thinker. He taught me a lot about how to think systematically like a scientist. And I benefited from that throughout the 90s. So throughout the 90s, I was mostly managing testers in projects and in companies in Silicon Valley. I worked mostly in the realm of developer tools. So I was in charge of debugger testing at Borland. I did compiler testing at Apple before that. And one of the things I noticed is, see, I was reading all the books about testing, all the books, and most of them had been written in the late 70s and mid 80s. So they had just basically been written by the time I was looking at them. And all these books were saying that you have to be very formal and procedural about your testing. You have to script everything, make test cases, use these templates to make your documentation. And what I was noticing at Apple is that didn't work at all. And basically the people who did successful testing didn't do that. They didn't do any of that stuff. You know what they did? They learned a lot about the product. They talked a lot with the developers. And they repeated that every day, every day, every day. Learn, experiment, talk to people. Learn, experiment, talk to people. And they were ignoring our templates. In fact, right around 1989, so right around here, my team at Apple did a study of all of the test plan documents that were in use in our department. And what we found is only a tiny minority of them were even being used on a day-to-day basis at all. Only like 3 cases out of something like 17 test cases did the testers even claim that they were paying any attention to the test plan. And so we decided in our group at Apple that we would just say, don't make written test plans anymore. Just don't do it. If you're going to just make them and ignore them, and they were only making them because the manager said they had to. So our department leader just said, all right, stop doing that then. And in so doing, we learned the kind of documentation that was really helpful, which was making lots of lists of risks, lists of features, lists of test ideas. That's the kind of documentation that I learned way back then was worth doing. Now, something else happened right around that time, right around the same time. The big group of testers that I joined at Apple Computer, 400 people all in the same building, we got split up. And then those smaller groups got split up. And everybody got split up and assigned to the development teams because they thought that that would be better for communication and cooperation with the developers, which it probably was a little better. But what it also did is it destroyed the testing culture at Apple Computer. It temporarily wiped it out. We had high morale. We had internal conferences. We would talk to each other all the time about testing. And suddenly, people are just working, like one tester would be working in a group with a bunch of developers and would be working for a development manager. And the development manager doesn't know anything about testing. And the development manager doesn't care about testing. So the attitude was, what are you doing as a tester? Don't you want to be a developer? Only losers are testers. So that happened all the way back in '89, but you still see the same kind of thing today. That testers exist surrounded by developers and always a lower status, almost always a lower status, almost always relatively disrespected. Not always. There are some really nice teams out there that I've been a part of. I'm a part of such a team right now. But that happened all the way back then. So some people who are really young and they come into the industry, they think that all this stuff with Agile and everything, that happened like out here or something. It happened way before that. Way back for me in the beginning of the 90s. Now, all through the 90s, it was an exciting time to be a tester for me, because there were lots of really interesting creative people that were coming up with ideas about what kinds of testing skills you need to learn and what does it mean to be a professional tester. And that was nice right up until Agile started. What happened with Agile is Agile came along and said, really, you don't need testers at all. Everyone should be a member of an Agile team. Everyone should do testing. Well, you know what happens if you say everyone should do X? Everyone should do their own shopping. Everyone should do their own driving. Everyone should do their own cooking. Everyone should do everything themselves. What happens is nobody's good at anything. You want everyone to test? Then no one will be good at it. And also, because testing is not a particularly important thing compared to development, everybody just swarms to development and does development anyway. And if they do testing, because everyone's supposed to do it, they just do it for a few minutes here and there, a few hours here and there. Nobody takes it really seriously. Sometimes people, they argue back to me and they say, oh, we take testing really seriously. And I go, really? So what testing books have you read? No, we haven't read any testing books. We haven't read any books about testing. Okay, have you read any books about JavaScript? Have you read any books about technology development? Oh, of course, yes. We read books about Scrum, books about JavaScript and Java development and clean code and all that. Right. So you're not studying testing. That's what I mean. I'm an actual professional tester. I've dedicated my career to testing. And when it's kind of like, you know, I think it's fun to drive fast. But what if I just showed up at a racetrack and just said, I'm a race car driver? You know, do you think the other race car drivers who do professional race car driving would go like, oh, you probably are. I'm sure. I mean, you say that you like driving fast, so that's it. You're probably a race car driver. I'll bet they wouldn't. I'll bet they would think I'm probably not a very good race car driver. As soon as they find out that I've never practiced it, I've never studied it. I've done some video games where I drove. Okay, that's the extent of it for me. Yes, I've driven for many years. I have a lot of experience driving cars. That does not make me a professionally skilled driver. That means I'm comfortable doing simple driving tasks in an ordinary car. Similarly, lots of people say, I've been testing for years, but they've done no studying of it. So they're just like people who are driving cars, but they're ordinary drivers. They're average drivers. They're not special stunt drivers. It's the same kind of thing. So right around 2001, I became a consultant. I started my company. Well, what happened was I was offended by something that my management asked me to do. So I told them I quit. And I went home and I told my wife that I had quit because I hadn't talked to her about that beforehand. And she was really nice about it. I'm so happy that she was. She didn't make me explain it too much. But the truth is that if she had said, oh, that's a really bad idea, I would have told her, well, you know what's a worse idea? If I throw somebody out a window and he dies and then I get arrested for murder. So that's why I quit, so that I wouldn't kill somebody. And then she would have agreed with me that it was a good idea to quit instead of going to jail. So I started my own business. What my wife's actual attitude about that was, angels will make everything okay. And I'm so glad she believes in angels. I'm a tester. I don't believe in angels, but I'm very glad to be married to someone who believes in angels. And I do strongly recommend marrying someone who does believe in magic instead of someone who is completely pessimistic all the time like me. I'm just lucky that she unwisely married me. I'm glad she went for it anyway. And we've been married 30 years by this point. So she and I run this company where she handles all the paperwork and all the money and stuff. And I make the deals and do all the testing stuff. And it's a perfect match because I'm too high-strung about finances, and she just relaxes and lets the angels do the accounting. And so we've been this partnership now professionally for 22 years. So when I moved into that was right when Agile was starting. And I was actually invited to the Agile Manifesto meeting where they created the Agile Manifesto. And I decided not to go at the last minute because my wife said I was too tired and I should rest. It was literally her only bad decision that she has ever made in our marriage. I wish I had gone to that meeting because that turned out to be a super famous meeting. I thought it was just going to be a bunch of people talking to each other. I'd been to meetings like that before. And then it turned out to be this magical historical meeting about Agile. But to tell you the truth, even though I was invited to that meeting, I really wasn't part of that community. I was an outsider in that community. The reason I was invited is I was famous for being outspoken about humanism in software testing, which it seemed like it was kind of agile. So that's why they invited me. But really, the Agile people were all developers, and they didn't really think testers should exist. They thought, really everyone should be a developer. I found that out later. What happened shortly after that is two interesting things. I wrote a book called Lessons Learned in Software Testing, which declared the existence of a new approach to testing that we call context-driven testing. The key thing about context-driven testing is we do not believe in best practices. You'll never hear me talking about best practices. I think anytime someone says best practice, what they really mean is, shut up, do what I say, and shut up. And I don't like doing that because I'm an anti-authoritarian. So I don't say this is a best practice. What I say is, here's a practice that I really like. In fact, every time that you are tempted to say best practice, I recommend that you just say practice. Like, here's a best practice becomes, here's a practice. And I predict you will never actually feel that you need to say best. If you want to, you can say, here's my favorite practice. Here's a fun way to do this. Here's an exciting idea for you. Here's a useful thing to do. All these things are better than saying, this is the best practice you could ever do because it's the best. It just sounds like a child is talking when people say best practice. It's like, my daddy said it's the best practice, and my daddy's always right. So we're against best practices in the context-driven testing community. Right that same year that the book came out, the ISTQB came out. And they are my enemies. The ISTQB, the International Software Testing Qualification Board. You know who they are? They're a bunch of German businessmen who weren't even testers, who decided they can make a lot of money by making young testers scared that they weren't going to be able to get a job, and by making lazy test managers have an easier time deciding who to hire. Oh, I just will hire anyone who gets this certification. We never needed the ISTQB for anything. We already knew how to tell if a tester was good or not. But the IST came along and offered basically nothing, and yet they've made millions of dollars on this. When they first started, they approached me and asked if I want to be in charge of the American ISTQB, and I said, absolutely not, it's immoral. So I missed out on all the money. But I would do it all again because I have a hard time making money hurting people. So a few years later, I wrote a book about self-education, and here I'm teaching, I'm consulting around the world, and things don't seem to be changing much in the industry until about 2012 or so. Then there came in a real interesting shift, because at that point, you not only have Agile, you got DevOps. And DevOps is like Agile with Sith Lords added to it, with crazy red-colored lightsabers and evil powers. Now, DevOps is not necessarily evil, but when it comes to testing, DevOps is a real force to tell people, stop testing. We don't want you to test. Go away, testers. Because DevOps, I'll explain. If you don't know what DevOps is, I can explain it very quickly. And if you do know what DevOps is, I have a better way to explain it. DevOps is development plus delivery jammed together. That's it. It shouldn't have been called DevOps. It should have been called DevLivery. That's what it is. Delivery and development so close together. Now, what normally is between delivery and development? Testing. So testing gets squished when DevOps comes around. I mean, not necessarily, but generally speaking, testing gets squished flat when DevOps comes around. So this started becoming a big deal in the last few years. And now we have another villain that's come along, AI. Now, so many ignorant people who don't study testing think, can't we just have AI do testing? Can't we just use machine learning and have it automatically generate test cases? The answer is no, you can't do that. And by the way, you also can't have self-driving cars. I know you want them, Elon Musk, but you're not going to get them. They don't work. They're not responsible. So this is the world that unfortunately you guys have to live in now. And I'm doing my best to change it by demonstrating that you can be a skilled tester and demonstrating why people should want skilled testers in the world. Actually, the pandemic has created a wonderful opportunity because I can't travel anymore. So I do a lot of online meetings, and the online meetings mean that I get to talk to a lot more people actually than I used to talk to. I mean, look at this. This is the very first time I've spoken to anybody in an event that's based in Georgia. Right now, first time. Never done that before. So before that, people didn't like having these online meetings, and now we're all used to it. I mean, we might not really like the online meeting. Personally, I like online meetings. I enjoy them, and I do them many times a day, most days, and I feel it's really productive. But I understand that a lot of people don't like these meetings. So I get it. But the fact that we are getting used to them, we're well practiced at having them, and we've figured out several ways of making them work. It really helps people like me because now I can teleport all over the place and talk to people and interact with them. So that's one thing. But the second thing that's happened because of the pandemic is I got hired by Tricentis, which is a test tool company. And they're having me build a new kind of test tool that's not just about automation. It's a tool to help testers think better and keep better notes about their testing. And there's a lot of different layers to it and stages. It's starting out now as more of a note-taking tool, but we're going to add a bunch of things to it. But I'm really excited about that for several reasons. And one of them is I'm actually on the project as a designer. And I haven't been on a DevOps project before. This is the first time I've been on an Agile/DevOps project in my career. Because all the rest of this time, you see, I've been consulting and teaching, but people haven't hired me to be on projects. But now I'm on this project, so I'm getting to see how these projects work really up close. And we have a tester on my project. I love working with this guy. So we've got one tester, we've got a bunch of developers, and one of the things that I do is I keep the development process from squishing the tester, because that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen around me. And we've got a wonderful set of developers. We've got a great product manager. So that just shows you can do these projects in a way that respects testers and respects the testing process. And that's what I'm doing. So if we just zoom out here, what we see is that in the time that I've been in the testing field, the microcomputer revolution had begun, which changed the whole industry. I was around before Agile, which is why I know that Agile was a little bit innovative, but we were doing lots of Agile-y things way back here in the 90s. We did every Agile thing. We just didn't have the buzzwords for it, but we did all that stuff there. But what we didn't do is the DevOps stuff, because DevOps is delivery and development slammed together. And we weren't doing that in the 90s because we didn't have fantastic internet. So we didn't deliver our product over the internet instantaneously. Only a very small set of companies were doing that. So that is a genuinely new thing, genuinely new. So if you feel like you're young and you want to think about what is the advantage that you have over old guys like me, the thing that's really true about that would be testing and development, which is highly integrated with social media, which is highly distributed, and bleeds into releases. So testing in production, live site testing, and all of that kind of thing. That is genuinely relatively new. And the fact that I've been around forever doesn't give me much of an advantage. In fact, the old guys have a disadvantage, because if you're old enough, then that means that you were too senior when DevOps came along to be on a DevOps project, because you would have been hired as a consultant or a manager or something. So it's only relatively young people who have actual experience being on a DevOps project, testing in a DevOps-y kind of project. So that's just something for you to know that might help you feel better about being relatively inexperienced compared to me. I don't have advantages over you in all of these departments. I'll also tell you something about the history of technology, though. I have been programming all along, right? All along here. But the tools that I know about, they're all obsolete. And the languages that I'm comfortable in are relatively obsolete. So I have to relearn. I need to learn Python. I need to learn Haskell. I've got a to-do list of different kinds of technologies that I need to learn. And I'm no better than any young person on that because the technology keeps changing. So young people really have a kind of an advantage, and that is your brains aren't cluttered up by a bunch of useless historical trivia like the instruction set for a 6502 processor, which is some of it is still stuck in my head, which is like ancient dust that is clogging up my thinking. So you're not burdened by that as much. So that's good for you. Now, does anybody have any questions that you want me to handle before I let you go? Oh, somebody put something in the message thing.
Yes, James, we have one question in our message. So can you read it, or maybe?
Yes, I see it. It's about automation. Yeah, automation is very popular because managers are very ignorant about testing, and they think that everything can be automated. And I think that if you talk about management automation, they go, what? Management you can't automate management. You can't automate CEOs. Like, okay, what about programmer automation? Can you automate all your programmers so you don't need programmers anymore? No, that's crazy. Really? So why do they think only testing can be automated, but not any of these other things? The problem with, quote, test automation is they don't mean test automation. They mean automated button pushing. And I don't mind automated button pushing, except that if the automated button pushing starts taking all of your time, imagine this. Maybe there's someone here who likes to cook. I don't like to cook. My wife wants me to not go anywhere near the kitchen. I just disrupt things. My wife loves to cook. I do not. But I'm imagining what it's like to be a cook because I've seen her cook. Imagine that you love to cook, but you use lots of kitchen equipment. And when you cook, you first have to repair your kitchen equipment. So your time cooking is spent fixing the stove, rewiring the stove, connecting the stove to a new power source, moving the stove from one part of the kitchen to another part of the kitchen. And you say, I'm a cook, but all I do is repair kitchen appliances, and I don't have any time to cook anymore. And people say, well, but these kitchen appliances are very important so that we can cook. We have to be able to have, once you finish repairing your stove, then you can go on and maybe do some manual cooking. But first you have to repair the blender. The blender broke again. And replace all the blades with the blender. And we want a bigger blender. And we want an AI blender. So that's how I feel. When people talk about automation and testing, I don't mind. In fact, I enjoy using tools of all kinds. I write code. I can show you lots of examples of interesting automation that I've used in my history. But what bugs me is that's not where it ends. It isn't just find a tool that can do some interesting thing. It's always becomes an obsession. So I'm against obsessive automation. It is an obsession in our industry. And the thing is, the irony is, even though I preach against it, I'm actually wonderfully situated to take advantage of this because I am a programmer. So I don't mind. I mean, I'll write tools. But I think it's a terrible thing. Well, let me put it this way. Okay, you see this? I will identify a region. Okay. From this point in my career, where is it? Okay, from this point in my career up until this point, I never did any testing and I never managed any testing that wasn't mediated by tools, because we were doing development tool testing in a command line environment. So it was all tools. We were always writing scripts. I didn't see a GUI until I went to Borland in 91. So that was about here. And then we tried to experiment with GUI automation around here. So I was very automation oriented until right around here, when I came to the conclusion in 1997 that I was wasting a lot of time, and all my friends were wasting a lot of time just trying to maintain this automation, and that there are all these people saying how important automation was, and they were not the people who were doing the testing, not the people who were studying testing. So even though I was involved with it all along there, my experiences of it were mostly convincing me that we were too obsessed. But here's the key thing I want to say. I believed from this point in time to this point in time, I believed from there to there, I believed that all testers should be programmers. It wasn't until right around 2000 that I realized that people who weren't programmers created opportunities to find different kinds of bugs. They helped us escape from dangerous biases, and that I really should be wanting testers to have a variety of backgrounds and not just my background. So now I feel that we need non-programming testers, because if you are a tester who codes, then you have a bias. You think like a programmer and not so much like a regular user. So now I feel that we should have mostly testers who are not coders, which leads to my advice. This is my advice to people about whether, as a tester, you should learn to code. My advice is, if you want to learn to code, you should definitely learn to code as a tester. It will make you a more powerful tester. But if you don't want to learn to code, if that's not interesting to you, don't learn to code. Please don't. Because you'll be no good at it. You'll always feel inferior. You won't enjoy your job anymore. What you should do instead is get a different skill that we need. A skill like analysis and modeling, or a skill like documentation, or leadership, coaching, teaching, rapid learning. There's a whole variety of different things that you can be good at that we really need in testing. And you can specialize in those things instead. It's like being able to code is like owning a large dump truck. Yeah, we sometimes need a dump truck, but everyone doesn't need a dump truck. It would be really hard to park if we all owned dump trucks. We'd have huge emissions. We'd be biased against driving places that dump trucks can't drive. So I think that I'm stuck with the dump truck. I know how to code. I think like a coder. I'm worried about bugs that I can't see, that my wife can see, because my wife is actually afraid of computers and doesn't even like computers. Her favorite thing is to make jewelry and to cook. So she's forced to use a computer because she runs my business, but she notices usability problems that I don't notice because I have no trouble figuring out the configuration screens on these applications. But boy, does she have trouble with that. And so her biases are different than mine. And if we were to test something together, we would be more able to find more good bugs than if we were by ourselves. So I'm not against automation, but I do think that it's become an obsession, and I think that's wrong. And I'm working to oppose that idea wherever I can.
Okay. Thank you, James, for sharing your experience with us. It was very inspiring and enjoyable for every single attendant, I guess. I know.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, I know what a tight schedule you have and don't want to delay you. So hope to see you soon at other events in the future. And good luck to you and wish you all the best. Thank you,
Leila. Bye, everybody.
Bye, James.
Bye.